Continuation. Welcome to the Amazing History channel. In one of the previous episodes, I already talked about the mysterious ancient Celts, their origins, culture, religion, political system, and economy. But the Celts were not only craftsmen, priests, and cattle breeders. They were also formidable warriors before whom entire civilizations trembled. Today, I want to immerse you in the world of their military art. We will examine their deadly weapons, learn what armor they wore, and what tactics they used in battle. And most importantly, I will tell you about the great Celtic invasions that shook Rome and Greece. How these barbarians managed to reach the very heart of the Roman Republic. Why their armies shook the Balkans and threatened the great cities of the civilized world. Alright, let's go. Greco-Roman historians often describe the Celts as wild barbarians, possessed of furious rage but lacking discipline, armor, and tactical thinking. However, this picture was far from the truth. The Celts were not just warlike tribes, but masters of the art of war, whose innovative technologies even influenced the Roman army. Thanks to their outstanding skills in ironworking, the Celts created deadly weapons. Their long swords were feared. The blades were well balanced, allowing them to deliver powerful slashing blows. Spears with various types of tips were used both for throwing and for piercing enemy armor in close combat. The shields deserve special mention. Large, oval, or rectangular, made of oak and covered with leather. In the center there was an iron umbo, which not only provided protection but was also used as a striking weapon. Such a shield was not just a means of defense, but also a formidable tool of attack. Despite the common myth about weak protection, the Celts were the first in Europe to invent chainmail. This armor, made of thousands of interwoven iron rings, provided excellent protection while remaining relatively lightweight. The Romans valued Celtic armor so highly that they later adopted it, creating the famous lorica hamata. In addition, many Celts wore iron helmets. Common models included the Aegean or port type, known for their strength and good protection for the head and cheeks. Such helmets later also became the basis for Roman legionary helmets. But not all warriors could afford armor. Most fought in simple shirts and trousers, and some even fought completely naked. Historians record cases when Celtic warriors would strip off their clothes before battle, shouting war cries and painting their bodies with blue dyes. This was probably ritualistic in nature and was used to intimidate the enemy. The Celts also made good use of war chariots, especially in Britain and Gaul. They used them not only as mobile platforms for attack, but also for rapid movement across the battlefield. Experienced warriors could attack from chariots with throwing weapons, then jump into the thick of battle and continue fighting in close combat. If the Romans and Greeks truly feared anyone, it was the Celts. Their troops were not only physically strong, but also skilled at psychologically intimidating the enemy before battle. Imagine yourself as a young Roman recruit, just having left your beautiful olive farm or the slums, and now you have to fight against these savages. The enemy is approaching, and you hear an ominous rumble of war drums coming from the fog, sounding like the roar of wild boars. The warriors, painted with war paint, shout and boast about their feats, stomp their feet in a ritual dance, and roar deafeningly. The most insane among them don't even have armor, only burning eyes and weapons ready to strike at the first thing in their path. At first glance, it may seem that the Celts rushed into battle without any plan, relying only on their rage and physical strength. However, in reality, their tactics were well thought out and deadly. Before the clash, the enemy's formation was weakened by javelin throwers and archers, forcing the opponent to lose formation and take cover. At the same time, chariots and cavalry would sweep around the flanks, disorganizing the battle lines, and when the enemy was sufficiently shaken, the decisive moment would come. A swift and relentless infantry attack. The Celts would charge forward with a roar, sweeping away everything in their path, breaking through enemy lines and forcing them to flee. This onslaught seemed chaotic, but behind it stood a centuries-old military tradition. For the Celts, war was not just a craft, it was a way of life. They knew how to use fear as a weapon, and their reckless bravery often proved stronger than the enemy's cold calculation. Around 450 BC, overpopulation in Gaul and Central Europe led Celtic chieftains to move south into the rich lands of Italy. In these lands, olives, figs, and wine were abundant, and the local peoples, such as the Etruscans, were wealthy but divided. The Roman historian Livy claims that the first Celts crossed the Alps as early as 600 BC. The legendary chieftain Bellovasus, leader of the Bituriges tribe, led his hordes through the snowy passes and descended upon the Etruscan cities, destroying everything in their path. After their victory, the Celts occupied the Po Valley and founded the city of Mediolanum, which would later become modern Milan. By that time, they already controlled all of northern Italy, and the local Ligurian and Veneti tribes gradually came under Celtic influence and assimilation. This was only the beginning of their great invasion, which would soon lead them to the very heart of Rome. The Celts were gaining strength in Italy, but they were not the only rising military power in the region. In 400 BC, Rome was still a small city with a population of about 25,000 people. Despite its modest size, it had already managed to subdue the Latin League, overthrow the monarchy, and establish itself as a republic. By 396 BC, the Romans, led by Marcus Furius Camillus, had defeated the Etruscans and captured the city of Veii, thus opening the way for further expansion northward into Celtic lands. Historians disagree about the causes of the first war between the Gauls and the Romans. Some believe that the tyrant of the Greek city of Syracuse, Dionysius I, incited the Celts to attack Rome in order to weaken its influence. Others believe that the Gauls were simply seeking rich loot and glory. According to the ancient Greek historian Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the conflict began with a personal drama. The Etruscan king of the city of Clusium had an affair with a married woman. Her offended husband, a wealthy merchant, decided to take revenge and turned to the Senones, a Celtic tribe, for help. Their leader, Brennus, saw this as an opportunity to seize new lands and riches. When the Gauls besieged Clusium, its inhabitants called on Rome for help. However, the attempt by the Roman envoys to resolve the conflict failed. Moreover, one of the Romans violated diplomatic etiquette by killing a Gallic warrior, which enraged Brennus. The Senate ignored the demand to hand over the killer. In response, the Celts declared war on Rome. The Romans, not yet having a professional army at that time, gathered a militia and moved towards the river Allia. However, the fear of the Celts' terrifying screams, their nakedness and their war horns was too great. The battle ended in a rout. The Romans fled in panic, and Brennus led his army straight to Rome. This was the first sack of the Eternal City in history. Some Romans barricaded themselves in Rome, on the Capitoline Hill, hoping to withstand the siege. It is said that one night the Gauls tried to sneak into the citadel, but they were discovered by a flock of sacred geese of the goddess Juno, who raised the alarm. That's how the famous phrase was born. The geese saved Rome. However, the Roman strength was running out. In the end, they agreed to pay the Celts 1,000 pounds of gold to make them leave. Livy says the Gauls tried to cheat the Romans by tampering with the scales. But Brennus just contemptuously threw his sword onto the scales and uttered a phrase that became famous, Vae victis, woe to the vanquished. Later, Roman sources, wishing to save the city's honor, claim that it was at this moment that Marcus Furius Camillus arrived with his army to help. He defeated the Celts and drove them out. But the historical truth is most likely this: the Gauls defeated Rome, took the ransom, and left, not seeking territorial conquests. After all, their only goal was loot. It took Rome an entire generation to recover from this humiliating defeat, but the Gauls had no intention of stopping. In the 4th and early 3rd centuries BC, their bands, like predatory packs, continued to invade central Italy, ravaging the countryside and threatening Roman territories. Their warriors were increasingly hired into the armies of Rome's enemies, whether Carthaginian generals or Greek tyrants of Sicily. But Rome was only one of the battlefields for the Celts. While the Italian tribes trembled at their approach, another part of the Celtic world turned its gaze eastward to lands where philosophy and hoplite helmets shone. As early as the beginning of the 4th century BC, the first Celtic warbands penetrated the northern Balkans, encountering the Illyrians, Thracians, and Paeonians. In 335 BC, several Celtic tribes reached Macedonia, where at that time the young but already formidable Alexander was ruling. These warriors, who lived by the laws of honor and personal valor, respected strength and considered the Macedonian king their equal. They did not dare to engage him in battle, but after his death, everything changed. Babylonian fever took Alexander, and his colossal empire fell apart. Weakened Greece became easy prey. In 298 BC, the chieftain Cambavel led his hordes through Thrace, but the Macedonian ruler Cassander managed to stop them at Mount Haemus. However, the Celts remained in the Balkans. On the contrary, during those same years, the Seri tribe founded a settlement in southern Thrace, which would later become the city of Serdica, known today as Sofia. But if that campaign was a reconnaissance in force, then in 281 BC, a real invasion began. A huge army, numbering, according to ancient authors, 85,000 men, although modern historians consider this figure exaggerated, crushed Paeonia, Thrace, and Macedonia. Soon their leader, Bolgi, met with the Macedonian king, Ptolemy Keraunos. His fate was tragic. He was thrown from his elephant in battle and killed on the spot. Macedonia was left without a ruler, and its cities fell into the hands of the Gauls one after another. Encouraged by their successes, the Gauls decided to go further. In 279 BC, under the leadership of Brennus, a huge army marched on Greece. Here I should clarify that this is not the same Brennus who devastated Rome several decades earlier, but another one, the leader of one of the Celtic hordes. So, the Hellenes still remembered how the Persians under Xerxes tried to conquer their lands, but now they faced completely different enemies, wild, fearless, rushing into battle without fear of death. Brennus led them not only for glory, but also for wealth. Delphi, with its countless treasures, lured him. When the leader was asked if he was afraid to offend the gods by plundering their temples, he just smirked. The gods are rich. They should share with those who take up the sword. However, in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, he was met by the united army of the Greek city-states. The Greeks remembered how their ancestors had stood here against the Persian invasion. And now they once again decided to turn the pass into a deadly trap for the foreigners. The hoplites, like a living wall, repelled attack after attack, while the fleet in the Malian Gulf prevented the enemy from bypassing the defense by sea. The Celts rushed into battle with furious bravery, but the Greeks held their formation, holding back the onslaught. After several days of fierce slaughter, Brennus realized that a frontal assault was pointless and ordered a retreat. However, he did not give up on his goal. After withdrawing his army, he led them around and moved straight toward Delphi, hoping to seize the mythical riches of Apollo. But the Greeks did not waver. They fought a decisive battle with him on the approaches to the sanctuary. Exhausted and suffering from wounds, the Gauls met fierce resistance. Some ancient authors even claimed that the gods themselves sided with the Hellenes, sending storms and frost upon the enemy. The defeat was devastating. 16,000 of Brennus's warriors were left lying on the battlefield. The leader himself, gravely wounded and realizing the inevitable collapse, took his own life. The remnants of his army, having lost their leader, scattered, and the survivors turned into bands of marauders who were soon killed by the local inhabitants. But even in this defeat, the Gauls left their mark on history. Not all of their warriors followed Brennus. Some of them split off even before the campaign to Delphi and moved further, deep into Asia Minor. These Celts were not seeking plunder, but land where they could settle. Among the Anatolian hills, they founded a new homeland, which soon became known as Galatia. Over time, Hellenistic rulers began to hire them into their armies, as the Galatians were recognized as some of the most formidable warriors of their time. Their language was spoken in Asia Minor until the 6th century AD, preserving the memory of the times when Celtic tribes lived and shook the old world. However, the golden age of Gallic conquests was coming to an end. The defeat at Delphi showed that disciplined armies, trained to wage war methodically and in an organized manner, could successfully crush the fury of barbarian hordes. The Celts realized this lesson too late. In Italy, Rome, having recovered from the defeat, was preparing for its great revenge. If you are interested in the further history of the conflict between the Celtic tribes and Rome, let me know in the comments and I will definitely make a follow-up. But that's all from me for now. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode. Bye.